Ladies and gentlemen, why do people leave the country of their birth? Why do other countries take them in? And what makes immigrants good immigrants? These are questions that are not especially relevant to those who live in a country that refuse to define themselves as nations of immigrants, but also on those that welcome immigrants. And these questions are not only relevant today. Historical examples are the British colonies in North America and the newly founded United States of America in the 18th century. First of all, the Germans are coming. Bernard Bailyn describes 18th century Europe as a continent of mobile populations and cites various figures and statistics to support this claim. Only a small number of people had a permanent residence, craftsmen moved from town to town, merchants traveled widely, servants followed their employees, found new households, and even farmers traditionally tied to the land were forced to abandon their sedentary lives because of war and economic upheaval. Most people did not travel very far, and many looked towards the east, and others immigrated to the new continent. The 13 original colonies of North America, from New England to Virginia, took in Europeans experiencing economic hardship and those seeking adventure after the arrival of the British colonists. But one would actively recruit those who could help build productive and prosperous settlements. They preferred young and strong immigrants above all, hardworking and adaptable men. The English-speaking immigrants from England, Scotland, and Ireland were just one portion of the population in the now British colonies, where original settlers had included Dutch and Swedish immigrants, and one did not have to venture into remote French or Spanish occupied areas to hear languages other than English. As Erin Fogelman writes, from Philadelphia to the Carolinas, one could wander without having to speak a word of English. That a British colony did not necessarily mirror the realities in England became apparent when one looks at Pennsylvania. Penn was born in England, and he was part of the Anglican Church and became Quaker. Charles II had offered him territories in the USA and therefore do away with the debt that he had with the father of Penn. In the province Pennsylvania, founded in 1681, the so-called prosperous country was planned to be led like a holy experiment. He wanted to found the colony on a contract with the natives and promised them religious freedom. Quake therefore depicted a peaceful kingdom with animals and people living alike. In the backdrop, he showed idealized the contractor from Penn with the lineal appellation. The holy experience was supposed to work as an implicit invitation to those who did not leave their European homeland for economic reasons, but also to escape religious persecution. This was especially true of the Anabaptists, whom Penn had met during a stay in Germany between 1671 and 1677. However, German Catholics and Lutherans, as well as Protestants from Salzburg, were supposed to found a new home in Pennsylvania. Philadelphia, a port city on the Delaware River, became a key destination for ships arriving from overseas. Around 75% of all Germans heading to the British colonies arrived here. Fogelman came up with a statistic that shows that Second, to those enslaved Africans who were increasingly used from the 17th century onwards to compensate for labor shortages in agricultures, it was the Germans who made up one of the largest immigrant groups. One went to referring to Germans. They were coming from the Palatines, although this was a widely defined term. From Krefeld, but also from regions such as Alsace and Switzerland. Even Dutch natives that had previously resided in German territories would then come to the colonies as Germans. And Pennsylvania turned into one of the main immigration provinces. In the mid-18th century, an estimated 60 to 100,000 Germans arrived in Pennsylvania and made up more than 1/3 of the population. Some of those newly arrived immigrants remained in Philadelphia, as many moved on, establishing agricultural communities in areas such as Lancaster County. Francis Daniel Pistorius, a Lutheran immigrant from Sommerhausen near Würzburg, received a large tract of land from Penn. And therefore, two foundation dates are very close to one another. The city of Philadelphia was founded in 1682, and 1 year later, in 1683, Pistorius founded a new village for German immigrants that was in close neighborhood and called it Germantown. So with that, we did not only have German immigrants, but a German town, a German city in the middle of Pennsylvania. The politician, writer, and inventor Benjamin Franklin was arguably the most famous resident of Pennsylvania in the 18th century. He was born in Boston back in 1706, and his father was from England. After having made his first experiences in the printing house of his brother, he moved to Pennsylvania and then went to study with William Beckford, the first printer in Pennsylvania. And he then got himself a name as a printer. He published the Pennsylvania Gazette after its founding in 1729 and transformed it into one of the most widely read newspapers in the British colonies. He also published works such as Poor Richard's Almanac. As a businessman, he kept a close eye on the German population he wanted to serve. And in 1732, he founded the first non-English speaking newspaper in the colonies, which was called the Philadelphische Zeitung. And it was aimed, and I quote, at all German inhabitants of the province of Pennsylvania. Unfortunately, Franklin had to abandon the paper in the same year after printing just 4 issues, as it failed to attract a large enough readership. This was likely due to the fact that the black letter typeface was not available, to which Germans were accustomed. Other publishers followed suit, and a German immigrant became the biggest competitor of Franklin, Johann Christoph Sauer from Ladenburg. He first worked as a tailor and then established himself as a publisher of German works. Through connections with the Ephrata cloister founded in Lancaster County in 1732, Sauer acquired type from Nuremberg and printed the first German-language almanac in 1738. In 1739, the first edition of his newspaper, Hochdeutsch-Pennsylvanische Geschichtsschreiber, was published, and in 1743 he brought out Martin Luther's Bible translation, making him the publisher of the first German-language Bible on the North American continent, and it was the first Bible that, in whatever European language, was published in the colonies. As place of publication for his almanac, he listed Lancaster, but this Bible edition was now published in Germantown. It was not until 40 years later that Robert Aitken printed the first English language Bible in America. This one was published in Philadelphia. Sauer was the most important competitor to Franklin, but he was not the only one to serve the German settlements. Anton Armbruster operated a printing press, and Samuel Holland and Johann Böhm published bilingual works in both German and English. Sauer published the Pennsylvanische Berichte, Holland printed the Lancastersche Zeitung. No other immigrant group lived as independently as the Germans, and therefore they needed their own newspapers. Second, Germans and Pennsylvania. After the failure of the German-speaking publishings of Franklin, he never again tried to bring attention to German publishers. William Wittenhouse was to be used as almanac. Franklin took on the numerous immigrants of his city and his colony. And he, at least publicly, questioned their willingness to assimilate. On 9th of May, 1753, he sent a letter to Peter Collinson. Franklin back then was not only known as a publicist, but as well working as a scientist. And he named his own many very practical inventions, like the Franklin rod. Franklin shared his thoughts to Peter Collinson as related to the willingness to work of the German immigrants. Then we had different suggestions and reflections on the pay and remuneration of the immigrants. Some were the wages of the inhabitants of England were higher. He described the Indians as a people who viewed idleness as a paradisiacal state, and stated that the Europeans abducted by Native Americans often struggled to adapt to city life after being freed.
Zurückkehren wollten. Die deutschen Einwanderer,
the German immigrants would be willing to work, but more difficult to teach. Those who come hither are generally one of the most ignorant, stupid sort of their own nation, I'm quoting, and as few of the English understand the German language and so cannot address them either from the press or pulpit, it is almost impossible to remove any prejudices they once entertain. Their own clergy have very little influence over the people, who seem to take an uncommon pleasure in abusing and discharging the minister on every trivial occasion. Not being used to liberty, they know not how to make a modest use of it. And as Peter Kolben says of the young Hottentots, that they are not esteemed men until they have shown their manhood by beating their own mothers. So the Germans seem to think themselves not free until they cannot feel the liberty in abusing and insulting their teachers. For Franklin, the Germans seem to be as particularly troublesome. They refused to learn English, and official announcements had to be written in both German and English. In court, we had a constant need for interpreters. Franklin painted a very wonderful picture to Collinson. If the stream of their immigrants cannot be redirected to other provinces, as you rightly propose, their number, or they will outnumber us, and we will not be able to maintain our language, and even the government of our colonies will become precarious. In 1755, Franklin published a pamphlet on immigration and population control, in which he attempted to show that although marriage was generally in decline in urban areas, it remained far more common in the colonies than in the English homeland. He also argued that the cost of slavery in the colonies exceeded that of the poorly paid servants in England. though he acknowledged that slaves had the advantage of being unable to seek other employment. The exodus of the English to the New World would not dramatically reduce England's population, according to Franklin, or affect the production of goods in the country. The question facing the Americans was that what immigrants they should favor. And I quote, "And since detachments of English from Britain sent to America will have their places at home so soon supplied and increase so largely here, why should the Palatine Boers be suffered to swarm into our settlements and by herding together establish their language and manners to the exclusion of ours? Why should Pennsylvania, founded by the English, become a colony of aliens, who will shortly be so numerous as to Germanize us instead of our Anglifying them, and will never adopt our language or customs any more than they can acquire a complexion?" Franklin there described a situation, a state of excessive foreign influence, but the Germans were not the ones who were only difficult to assimilate, as people acted as strangely as they looked. Despite the shortage of women in Pennsylvania, he saw little hope for marriage between Englishmen and German women, as the Germans' foreigners was evident in their appearance as well, and the women were not particularly attractive. Franklin concludes his pamphlet with a general table of nations, and I quote, "That the number of purely white people in the world is proportionably very small. All Africa is black or tawny. Asia, mostly tawny. America, exclusive of the new colonies, wholly so. And in Europe, the Spaniards, Italians, French, Russians, and Swedes are generally of what we call a swarthy complexion, as are the Germans also. The Saxons only excepted, who, with the English, make the principal body of white people on the face of the earth. I could wish their numbers were increased, and while we are, as I may call it, scoring our planet by clearing America of woods, and so making this side of our globe reflect a brighter light to the eyes of inhabitants in Mars or Venus, why should we, in the sight of superior beings, darken its people? Why increase the sons of Africa by planting them in America, where we have so fair an opportunity by excluding all blacks and tawnies of increasing the lovely white and red? But perhaps I am partial to the complexion of my country, for such kind of partiality is natural to mankind." From an Anglo-Saxon perspective, and Franklin, only the Saxons of all the Germanic peoples were white. Franklin was a prominent public figure in Pennsylvania, and not the only one to hold this view of the Germans. As early as 1727, the Pennsylvania General Assembly had criticized German immigrants for their unwillingness to assimilate and forced them to take an oath of allegiance to the English king. In the annual report he sent to the Pates in Halle in 1750, German-born clergyman Henry Mühlenberg also raised concerns about the Germans' unprecedented wickedness and crime, exclaiming, "Oh, what a fearful thing it is to have so many thousands of unruly and brazen sinners come into this free air and unfenced country." The German Society of Pennsylvania, founded in Philadelphia in 1764, not only cared for impoverished immigrants, but also maintained a German support network and a German library, a state of affairs that did not exactly encourage assimilation. Assistance was to come from England. The Germans would not immediately be made into whites or absolved of their sins, but an English school system should make a beginning. In 1754, a new concept was addressed. In the coming years, a new pamphlet was sent about the school system for English philanthropists. And at least the adjustment over the Palatine Wars to British language, customs, and traditions was at least intended. One significant event took place in 1765. Approximately 2,500 German immigrants went to Philadelphia in late September and early October to be naturalized and wanted to be part of the political decisions. It was about taxes, but as well about the question of whether Pennsylvania should remain a territory under the control of the Penn family. It was rumored that Franklin, who had traveled to London in 1757 to serve as ambassador for the Pennsylvania Assembly, regarded himself as governor of the royal colony. One cartoon from the period, which targeted Penn, showed the Philadelphia courthouse, the Germans who had gathered there, and an angel hovering in the air with a banner that read, "The Germans are victorious." Some of the Germans were rulers in the mid-1770s, but most had begun protesting British rule. Their political views often depended on the religious communities. The Mennonites positioned differently as the Lutherans, and the religious immigration had already started and was supposed to be strengthened. But for whom were those unfavorable, those immigrants? Franklin went back to Philadelphia and was supposed to walk into, or went from supporting to Crown to playing a leading role in the Revolution. His son William remained loyal to the king throughout the Revolutionary War and went into exile in England in 1782. The Declaration of Independence of the United States, drafted in 1776 and signed by Franklin, was, of course, printed in English and German versions. Only a few copies of the German edition have survived, and one of which is owned by the German Historical Museum here in Berlin. It was presented currently at the exhibition What is Enlightenment? Questions for the 18th Century. Thank you.